This is the SimGod EW100P and they are the best IEMs you can get under $20. Much better than the Trues, more balanced, fuller sounding, better bass, less harsh, and in general just an upgrade all around while remaining very clean and not boring. Versus the Zeros, they have better vocal detail, more forward mids, and increased treble air without being overly sibilant like the Zero. It also fixes the mid-bass scoop from the Korg's DSP, again sounding fuller and more weighted and accurate in its timbre as well as imaging, so not as floaty because it's not using DSP. Don't expect amazing resolution at $20, but nonetheless, it's still a great starter set, just like the KB Year Ross Finch if you're looking for a shit ton of bass that literally shakes your ears. You can also look for the QKZ HBB for a warmer sound, so something in between the EW100 and the basshead Ross Finch. At under $50, we have the Tangent 1, which is similar to the 100P, but airier with a little more mid-bass, giving bass guitars and male vocals more power behind them. It's also one of the best IEMs under $200 for scaling and listening at very high volumes, so very smooth and never fatiguing for only 25 bucks. On the other hand, if you want some deep subwoofer-like bass, there's also the Truthier Clinical Red with the 10 ohm adapter. Basically a smoother and more refined version of both the original Truthier Zero and the HBB Con without sacrificing the fun bassy part. Now in terms of technicalities, they're all very similar before you step up to the $80 mark, where my choice would be the 7Hz Sonus. The Sonus is basically just a cheaper version of the Hexa, very similar in resolution, but with fuller vocals, more forward, less pushback, and just sounds more natural to my ears. It has a clean, balanced sound signature, bass light, but with good separation and details, more resolving than both the 100P and Tangent 1, but it can be too safe and boring for some listeners since it's Harman inspired. So in that case, if you want a more exciting version of Harman or the Sonus and Hexa without being, overly V-shaped and aggressive, then you can try the Tangzu Furu, which is very natural but still very fun. It's not as clean as the Sonus, but it's a lot more engaging and still a bump in technicalities compared to the cheaper sets. However, if you want the most resolving, the most technical IEM without breaking the bank at under $150, then you can go for the SimGod EM6L. They're a great all-rounder, clean, detailed, spacious, with a nice bass boost and not overly bright. It doesn't scale as well as the Tangent 1 and does indeed get spicier in the upper mids at loud volumes, especially with J-pop and K-pop where the upper mids are more aggressive, but it's a wonderful listening experience at mid volume, and again, best bang for your buck resolution wise. There's also the Kiwi Years Quartet if you want a warmer bassy set, so this would be for people upgrading from the QKZ HBBs or the Blonde Z300. Plenty of mid bass, slams nice, and lots of tuning options you can mess with. It does trip itself in busier genres like rock and alternative stuff, but for those my pick would be the Tin Hi-Fi P1 Max, which is very mid-range focused, making it great for busier instrumental tracks. It's a planar, so it can pull that off without sounding too muddy. The P1 Max or the Pandas are very smooth, airy with a hint of warmness, and although notes aren't as sharp and resolving as the EM6L, they do indeed scale a lot better and are one of the most immersive sets I've heard, and not a slouch at all when it comes to technical performance because again, it's a planar. Vocal wise, the Let's Share DZ4 is my pick before the more expensive sets like the Studio 4s. It's definitely more of a niche IEM for slower and simpler tracks like ballads, but it's just so natural, full, powerful, and intimate while also scaling very well at high volumes. But if you want something more well-rounded for different genres, then the original C Audio U-Mate is the benchmark for natural vocal timbre before the Studio 4s. As for the best IEM under $250, my pick would be the Kiwi Years Quintet. It hits all the major areas when you're looking for a great IEM, with one small exception. For example, it's one of the best value-wise, competing with the Blessing 3 and Performer 8 in terms of pure technical performance for like $100 less, and it's a small step up from the EM6L, as well as having no treble masking versus the Performer 5. The low end is also engaging enough, not bass head levels, but enough body for bass guitars and weight for male vocals to sound full, but also slightly sparkly, and detailed because of the upper mids and treble. So overall, it just does everything exceptionally well, with the only drawback being that it can sound a little bit metallic in its timbre. Now you don't notice this at mid volumes, but it becomes obvious once you crank it up, as cymbals and electric instruments can sound overly brittle, sharp, and just unnatural with artists like the War on Drugs and his electric guitar riffs. So if you listen loud or are sensitive to the elevated upper mids and treble, then I would recommend saving up for the Manger T2, which is my favorite, under $350 after the original T, which is sadly discontinued. The T2 is more balanced than the Quintet and the Blessing series, with smoother but still full sounding and intimate vocals. It's neutral dark leaning, so it's not going to be the most resolving and airy as some of the others, but the T2's got one of the most holographic staging and imaging you can find at its price point, giving you a more immersive and intimate listening experience with great bass texture on top. However, if you want a great all-rounder, then the Hype 2 fixes the metallic timbre of the Quintet while maintaining resolution and having better bass texture and impact because of its dual dynamic driver setup. The only downside to the Hype 2 is that it doesn't sound as special, quote unquote special, as sets like the T2 or the P1 Max, because it just does everything correctly with no faults and just very safe. On the other hand, for bass lovers under $350, the Pinan Serial has incredible bass texture and tonal timbre. It's not a blast your brains out type of bass set, but the low end is very refined, tactile, full, and resolving without being muddy. So it's basically just bass, but tastefully done. But I know that's not gonna satisfy the hardcore bass heads out there, so for you guys that want a shit ton of bass, at under $450, the Fat Freak Maestro Mini is the endgame bass head set. You honestly don't need to spend any more than this if you just want pure quantity bass. It's basically the evolution to the Ross Finch, but with better sub bass and treble extension, and just a full bump in resolution and technical performance. It's basically the pinnacle of fuck you bass. But for those who are looking for a more clean and neutral sound for around $450, then my rec would be the Soft Ear Studio Force. So this would be for those who are upgrading from their Sonas and Hexa. The Studio Force are very inoffensive, natural, no BA timbre, and surprisingly good low end for an all BA set with open, detailed, forward-leaning vocals, ideal for pop, rock, and indie. It's pretty much the pinnacle of Harman, and although it's not quite an all-rounder like the Hype 2 because it lacks some sub-bass extensions, so not as rumbly and deep. If you're looking for an upgrade over the Hype 2, then you'll need to jump up to the $600 mark, where the best all-rounder would be the Zen's Top. I personally wouldn't upgrade because the difference is minuscule, with the only main improvement being that the top has a little more treble detail and just overall resolution. The bigger jump would actually be going from the Hype 2 to the Monarch Mark 3s and just skipping this $600 price category if you already own the Hype 2 or the T2. But if you're upgrading from something like the Olina SC, then yeah, the top is an excellent all-rounder. Some other sets at around $600 would be the Lecture EJ07M for its mid-range focus and holographic staging, or the original The Audio Oracles for the airy, sweet vocals. Both are more unique and more niche than the Zen's Top, and personally I would pick those two over the top. As for the $800 category, there's really not much here right now. The only noticeable one is the Moondrop S8, which I actually heard a long time ago along with my variations, but it's basically just a better variations, fuller sounding, less thin, feels better separated because the bass is less distracting and it has airier treble. I personally wouldn't pay $800 for it because I still like the EJ07M more, and you can get the EJ07Ms on sale for like around $500. But I do have the new Moondrop Black Saber coming in, as well as the 7's Acoustic Supernova, so very excited to compare those two. But for now, I guess the S8 wins by default. Oh wait, there's actually the RS5 and the EJ07, so never mind. Okay, for vocals, I would obviously take the RS5 then, because it's one of the most natural IEMs ever and the best for vocals in my opinion. But as for my personal favorite, it would of course be the original EJ07, because it's the most holographic and immersive set that I have ever heard. But you do need to listen to them at loud volumes, or else it just sounds meh. But moving up to the $1,000 mark, we have the Monarch Mark II and the Monarch Mark III's. If you want the best all-rounder with endgame technical performance, then that would be the Mark III's. It's got deep, rumbly bass, clean mid-range and vocals, as well as having solid treble extension. But as for the Monarch Mark II's, they're more vocal and mid-range focused. So it really just depends on your library, as both are detail monsters. As for the best around $1,500, my pick would be the Audio Prestige LTD. TLDR, it has a very airy and detailed sound signature without sounding thin like the Helios, and I would take them over the Mess Mark II's because the vocals on the Mess are just a bit too pushed back for me. The LTD has a more laid back presentation, so more airy, whereas the Mess is sharper and more aggressive in the treble and bass. But technical performance wise, they're both very close with a slight edge to the LTD because of the more detailed upper mids and vocals. As for the Helios SC, I've only heard the original, but based off the graph and other reviewers, they're very similar. So in that sense, I would still take the Prestige LTD because it sounds fuller while maintaining that airiness. And finally, my pick for the best IEM around $2,000 is the Sony IER Z1R. No, not the U12Ts. The Z1R's got the best bass in terms of resolution and texture, and also the most natural treble timbre that I've heard. It's got one of the best sound stages with top of the line, crystal clear resolution, pinpoint imaging, etc, etc. The only area that I can find faults in is in the scooped out upper mids. It just doesn't sound good on ballads or vocal centric tracks since it's just too recessed and lacks the fullness and power, but on everything else it just beautiful. Likewise, the U12T also has the scoop upper mids issue, but the low end and treble isn't as refined and natural as the Z1R, especially at higher volumes where it sounds sharp. The layering and separation is better, but the Z1R already has top of the line technical capabilities, so it's not doing much, which is why my pick would be the Z1R. Now, I would put the Diva up there as my personal favorite, especially for vocals, but Elysian's quality control and customer service is so shit that it's just gonna get blacklisted until they get their shit together. But anyways, I hope this list helped. I got more stuff on the way, but that's all for now. Stay tuned, and I'll see everyone next time.